Yes, technology, vindicated, or... Okay, good morning, everyone. Well, first of all, thanks a lot for having me, to the organizers. I hope that you have some energy. I'm going to talk for quite some time. I think maybe a bit more than an hour even, right? So if you have maybe some question already during my talk, please don't hesitate. Also, if maybe I talk too quickly, also let that be known, right? I have a tendency to talk quite fast. So that's the first caveat of 3. So the second thing I would like to just add before going into my topic is I have maybe slightly changed my talk to not only cover really hardcore computational stuff, because I don't think you want to hear me talk about machine learning for an hour and a half. So what I've tried to do in this talk is to be a bit broader and think about obscurity or zones of not knowing in broader terms. And as you will see, that topic connects very much to some of the things Jana was already talking about. And my third point before really going into the topic is, so I'm not a social scientist, right? I come from the humanities. I think about myself as a technology researcher. If you use the terms of Gilbert Simondon, you could say I'm a mechanologue, right? I'm really interested in technical things, but for me it's an entryway to go to, I think, the questions that maybe most of you here are interested in, namely how to use the opportunities that, well, certain online platforms afford in order to do social and cultural research. So I'm going to talk a lot about technology, but I hope I'm going to do it in a way that is also valuable for broader research. All right, so I want to just start a bit with some maybe relatively broad statements. I want to situate my talk, but also digital methods, a bit in this context of what here I called an increasingly technological world, right? You can of course argue that, you know, human beings are always technological, but I want to put forward a number of arguments for why indeed, you know, we do live in what you could call an increasingly technological world. And I do think that what we're trying to do with digital methods is to create better understanding of that world, and not just personal understanding, right? That satisfies maybe the questions that you have, although you're of course your curiosity is the first curiosity you want to address, I would say. So you're also your own audience. But we want to produce also some shared understanding, meaning arguments that you can put out in the world, right, and that hold up to scrutiny. And that is, I think, why we embed our efforts in methodology, to really be able to say, well, you know, you can repeat that. Those are the steps I was taking in order to produce these findings, to make these kind of assessments. So digital methods is connected to questions of technology on a number of different levels, right? There's not a single one. And also in different ways. I'm going to talk about that quite a bit in a moment. I would say they also incorporate different practices, right? So it's not digital methods. I wouldn't call it a quantitative paradigm, right? I would say there's a lot of room for all kinds of methods, right? And people very often in their projects, they kind of combine different approaches, and I really want to emphasize that later on in the talk. And that also means there are different epistemological sensitivities, right? Like how you want to know, what type of answer kind of satisfies your curiosity and produces the kind of knowledge you wanna create. And that really means that you're always engaged in kind of situating your own research inside of a methodological but also theoretical configuration. And that is really something I want to think about today, this kind of situating. So when I ask, when does the black box become too dark, it's a bit about making choices in relation to that. So I want to sketch a number of kind of critical pathways. I mean, critical, that term is really an overused, especially in the humanities, right? Everything has to be critical. What I really mean by that is maybe something that is not just like a recipe, but that really thinks that taking a moment and maybe interrogating some of our basic convictions can really be a productive way of moving forward and ultimately of producing a more robust and if you will, better knowledge. So I'm going to discuss some of the many instances of technology that come into play when we do digital methods research. And I want to maybe just to give you a bit of a background, the kind of thinking process that leads me to this question. So I have for a long time I've worked in an information science department and I've taught programming, right? And that was a really kind of a formative experience. And this year has been the first time in quite a number of years that I've taught programming again. In a humanities department, and what we were doing was so really to people who have never programmed before, and a very small group of very good master students, and we got into programming a bit, and then what we were really interested in was to see how far can you develop methodology or draw on existing methodology to integrate like tool making, like really building of a method into a humanities setting. But I don't think it's all that different in the social sciences. And this question of code, right, is a question that, for example, is asked a lot in the context of the digital humanities. There's a huge debate, whether a digital humanist has to be able to code. And Steve Ramsey famously said in a presentation he gave, I think, at the MLA conference, where he said, "Do you have to know how to code?" I'm a tenured professor of digital humanities, and I say yes, right? I'm not saying that this is the case, but it's really, for me, it's really a question. So what do you have to know? And Theo Röhle and we have recently written a paper, and normally I don't think it's really great form to do a self-quoting, but what we try to understand there is to focus a bit more in the context of tool use on a critique of not the tools but of the users. Meaning, like, what do we have to learn? What do we have to know? So when I talk about this notion of black box and this question of obscurity, I really mean that in this relationship to capacities of individuals to maybe deal with that obscurity in one way or another. So that's a bit the background that this is kind of situated in, including the question of teaching. What if you design a new program, for example, for social media analysis, like what would you put in the curriculum, right? I think those are really important questions, in particular as more and more tools appear, more and more methods, more and more branches. So that's the background. But before going into that more deeply, I want to just situate digital methods a bit further in kind of two sets of observations. So one way that one could start the question, why digital methods in the first place, would be to look at different narratives that have introduced digital methods, right? And of course, methods that use computers or that use mathematics have existed for a very long time, right? There's the history of statistics. There's, there was a journal called Computers in the Humanities that was founded in the 1960s, right? So this is not new stuff. But the way that digital methods very often is introduced, at least this kind of Amsterdam style brand of digital methods that is very much connected to the Digital Methods Initiative and the work of Richard Rogers, is that it's not just a new method for the analysis of some stuff, but it's really a reaction to changing conditions of life itself, right? In the sense that we are living in increasingly technological environments, and these environments ask or they require new approaches, because we cannot simply use the same methods, or at least not exactly the same way, than we have done earlier. So there we really have some broader developments, and I don't want to only connect them to technology, but maybe make it kind of a two-aspect argument, right? That maybe complexifies that a little bit and puts a little bit less weight, or puts maybe some more weight on also social transformations and not just technological ones. So what do I mean when I say digital methods react to changing conditions, right? To changing changes in society. Well, I mean, on the technological side, all those terms, right? Digitization, datafication. I really like the term computerization, which was really big in the 1980s, the best decade. No, but I really like it because ultimately, in my view, it kind of really includes the other terms, and it really goes quite further in many ways. But okay, so there's this idea that many domains. I have here like culture, social interaction, business, politics. One could go on, like intimacy, relationships, and so forth. Right, have been affected by technological change. Some of that, you can quite easily pinpoint. You can point to things like, cloud computing, smartphones, distributed sensor arrays, if you want to focus more on the physicality of it or the infrastructural element. But you can also look at really applications like social media, finance. Those of you who work in university administration, are all familiar with the many layers of software we use to deal with the bureaucracies that modern university requires, right? So every practice, or at least so it seems, is in some way channeled, right, through some kind of computer scheme. So that can take all kinds of forms, right? Very small, very large, lots of algorithms, not so many, right? So it's a broad thing. So one of the questions for digital methods is indeed like, how do you study social and cultural practices and the role that these kind of technological phenomena play in them, right? And this already points to kind of a first element of obscurity. A first element of obscurity, meaning that, well, a lot of those systems, you cannot just, open the latch and look inside, right? There's this famous scene in Zoolander, right, where they say, oh, the files are in the computer, and then they open the computer and where are the files, right? So it's not a singular thing. There are different elements coming into that, but that kind of technological moment already has a number of elements that point toward obscurity, right? And you could now run through different elements of computerization. For example, and I do think it is a good example. Facebook now has 2.1 billion monthly active users, right? It has 1.4 billion daily active users. That's a lot, right? I remember when I was studying communication, the biggest newspaper at that time, and I think it still is, was the Asahi Shimbun in Japan, which then had like 12 million readers, probably less now, right? So this in many ways is like the biggest media structure that has ever existed in the history of humanity, right? It's really a thing, Facebook, and if one looks at the 10 most visited websites, you find other examples, and this is just, I would say, the tip of a much larger iceberg. But I would say that there's a second set of developments, and here I'm really schematizing, right? So please, the social theorists, please take all of that with a bit of a caveat here, or a grain of salt, that I'm really simplifying. But there is really, I think, an argument to be made, and many authors have made it. I'm only citing here people like Giddens or Beck, but you could also, you know, you cite a whole swath of authors like Lyotard or, in this case, also Lazzarato. This argument that we're living in increasingly post-traditional societies, to use Anthony Giddens' term, where social bonds have effectively to be made rather than inherited from the past. And choice has become obligatory, right? So another way of thinking about that, and this quote is from Ulrich Beck, is that there have been processes of individualization and diversification of living styles and situations. Social life, and that's Lazzarato talking, has exploded into a multiplicity of activities and statuses, expressing subjectivities and expectations which cannot be reduced to the traditional concept of class, right? Which, you know, for a very long time was one of the guiding conceptual notions for how to make sense of society. So even if, you know, these kind of narratives that point towards diversification, you know, they come from different directions, and they don't necessarily all agree on the same elements. I would say that society has become more complicated in other ways than simply becoming more technological, right? The notion of class is not simply a conceptual tool, but it also has really been a methodological tool that really helped social scientists to structure, for example, a representative survey through, you know, kind of that layered grid of a census that allows to, you know, divide a society into socioeconomic classes and then use that in order to, you know, describe a society. So societies, contemporary Western societies, but I actually don't think that's only true for Western societies, they are more difficult to make sense of. So that's a second element of obscurity, right? That society is kind of complex. And I think the time we're currently living, you know, really makes that quite clear. So those are kind of like two vectors of obscurity and two vectors of just stuff getting complicated, if you will. And they really constitute challenges for, you know, understanding of what happens around us, and in particular for the social sciences and the humanities, both on the level of theory and methodology. And I think if you take a bit of a step back and look maybe at the last 50 years, you can really see that that there has been a trend towards theories that, for example, try to think society from the bottom up, right? Inductively. The work of Gabriel Tard, for example, but also Simmel, even social exchange theory, I think, fits into that framework, where instead of saying, you know, here we have a class, we're kind of, you know, looking at micro observations and how kind of society builds up from the ground. Social interactionism, I think, would also fit in there. So one set of theories that kind of, you know, think society a little bit differently, and also theories that are able to account for the technological element. So the actor network theory, I would argue, is not just a social theory that, you know, fits well with any kind of society. I do think it does to a certain degree, but I would also say that it's really a reaction to, you know, these kind of developments that I've just described, so software studies, of course. And in terms of methodology, there has also been an attempt to find more complex descriptions, right? And one doesn't have to look all that far, right? Statistics, the growth of multivariate analysis, for example, that is able, you know, to look not just at a relationship between, you know, some dependent and some one independent variable, but are really able to to look at the arrangements of quantitative elements in maybe more stratified and more diversified ways. Network analysis, right? It's something that's been around for now 60, 70 years, social network analysis, but has really come into its own, I think, very strongly over the last 20, 30 years. And then, of course, theories that are also able to account for the technological part of the equation. You know, into that I count digital methods, but also stuff like online ethnography, right? So both methods and theories that are able to deal with these kind of two developments. So that's a bit kind of the problem that I would say digital methods kind of reacts to, or is at least an attempt to react to. Those kind of two zones of obscurity. But there are also many new opportunities in a way, right? And this connects to what Jana has already said. Well, I mean, the fact that we're using smartphones for quite a number of things that we do, you know, produces a lot of data, and all of those other kind of technological instances, there's a production of enormous amounts of data. Now, independently of the question whether we can access them or not, they are being produced, right? And these data, they reflect indeed instances of grammatization, right? So Agre uses this concept, first of all, to think about how technology channels behavior, right? He really argues that, well, if you have, for example, a restaurant, right, and that restaurant works in a certain way. You know, orders are being taken, the kitchen interacts with the waiters in a certain way. And if you now introduce something, a computer system into a restaurant, for example, that people, they take the orders on a PDA, for example. Sorry, that's a term you no longer know. Huh? So on a smartphone, right? And then that gets directly transmitted to the kitchen, and then there's you know, maybe like a queue for the preparation of meals. That is not just the replication of that previous restaurant in kind of a new form. No, it's a grammatization of that activity, right? And it changes how we behave. Or how that restaurant works. And out of that, of course, out of that grammatization comes, you know, data that basically connects to all of those instances. So, but just a comparison here. I have two web pages of economist Tyler Cowen. I like to use economists as examples. I don't know why. It's maybe because they have very high follower numbers these days, and that can be kind of interesting. And here there's a normal web page, right? And here's Tyler Cowen's. Well, you can see it very well, but so that's a web page, a personal web page, and that here is his Facebook page, and the level of structurization or grammatization is, of course, much higher, right? Whereas here, he writes, oh, I'm an economist, right? Somewhere here there's a pull down where he chose his profession to be economist, right? And to get that data out. It's a very different process. This is ultimately kind of natural language, you know, that maybe we can use some, you know, some tricks to parse and maybe get, you know, information out. But this is highly structured, and we use APIs to get to that data. And these APIs, they give us, you know, really nicely structured data where the meaning of the individual data items, at least in part, it is much less ambiguous, at least in the context of the system. This doesn't mean that, for example, the web doesn't have structure. Huh? So this was one of the. This is the first tool that came out of the Digital Methods Initiative in Amsterdam. It's done with the issue crawler, and the issue crawler, if you will, looks for a grammatized element of the web, the hyperlink, that has a technical you know, form, a canonical form that you can very easily extract through scraping from a web page, well, and then you say, okay, so here I have this page, links to that page, and so forth. So even the web, if you will, is not kind of an unformalized situation. There are probably no situations that don't have at least, you know, proto-grammatical forms, but definitely not in the context of computers. It's just that this kind of grammatization goes much further in the context of social media platforms, for example. And of course, we are now very good at self-grammatizing. So every time you use an emoji, you're of course making yourself more machine readable than you were before. So thank you. So grammatization, and that I think is kind of is really important, right? It's not just something that connects to data, but that really also has to do with governing practices, at least to a certain degree, right? I'm not kind of you know, arguing that our behavior, our practices are the outcome of those platforms, but there is, you know, I would say a degree of orchestration, and then of course also needs to be accounted for when making interpretations. I do think, and a number of scholars have made that argument, that you could compare something like Facebook a little bit to an experimental setup, right? If you take that idea of a social science experiment, right? In a social science experiment, you create an artificial situation, right? You're saying, oh, you know, push that button, then there's an electroshock, right? That's not something we do in everyday life. I mean, I don't know about you, but you know, so there's really an aspect of that, right? And that is interesting to take into account, because we can, of course, then always ask, so which grammatical elements of the platform maybe facilitates or suggests, or, you know, you can add other verbs here, which kind of behavior. I would say that probably there are three types of data that come out of this, and a lot of it is quite unusual. Unusual in the sense that if you take to be like traditional data to be like census data, you know, socioeconomic data, these data are actually quite difficult to get online, but there's a whole stuff of other things. And I would maybe want to divide them into kind of three elements. Grammatized data could be things like IDs. So for example, here we have a tweet by Antonio Costa, who was recently in Davos, right? And why Portugal now? And there he has, for example, a username, right? That's an ID. He also chooses a name for himself, which actually you can change. The username you can change. You lose the account, right? You can close the account, the user ID, if you will, but you can, for example, change the description of that username. Then you have some grammatized elements in there. You have a hashtag. You have addressing another account, right? Very important, very important. All of that is, normally has a transactional component to it. You've certainly heard the term transactional data. Whenever you hear that term, that means data that have a timestamp, right? That's what a transaction is in computer speak, right? Something that happens at a particular moment. So Antonio Costa, for example, he has published that tweet at a certain point in time. Then it has been retweeted at a certain point in time, and so forth, right? Then you have a second type of data, and that would be then maybe free-form message content, right? So you have form fields where you can write in whatever you want, right? You can upload images, you can upload videos. I've already said, you know, this is not necessarily data that cannot be computed, right? Especially if you're using emojis, but it's a data that, you know, is a bit more complicated from a methodological standpoint. You know, free-form text, yeah, you know, there are some challenges involved. And then thirdly, you have what I've called here platform markers. Of course, all of this comes from platforms, but which I think are really kind of a type of data that inform us on the functioning of the platform itself. And that can be stuff like metrics, you know, that are not just important in terms of thinking about, for example, engagement. So how many tweets, if I look at all the tweets that Antonio Costa has sent, right? And I can say, hey, the last 100 tweets, and those are the most retweeted, and then I can say, interesting. But of course, these things like retweeting and liking they produce an effect in the platform, right? So they will heighten the visibility of that message to other people, right? And in that sense, they're really a platform marker. A lot of platforms now also produce all kinds of strange flags. So for example, Twitter has a whole layer that you could call, if you want to, layers of censorship, right? Creators, for example, are able to exclude certain messages from appearing in certain countries and so forth, right? There are automatic flags and so forth. So that is stuff that users never see or rarely see, but that still exists in there. And all of those things, as Jan has already said, really kind of vary from platform to platform and require local forms of analysis. So this is, if you will, a little bit a response to that technical difficulty, right? So, it's difficult to know what's going on Facebook because it's so big and it asks the question, how can we observe that? But on the other side, we have some data and we can analyze these data. So the second opportunity, if you will, is a bit of an answer concerning this notion of diversification. So society becoming more diversified doesn't mean that it's without structure, right? That it's without differentiation, that it's without inequality or without domination, right? It's very much, when I say that the concept of class no longer works, doesn't mean that there's no domination. It's just that domination now works in a way that is more complex than the concept of class would suggest. So terms like stratification or distinction are ways to explain how hierarchies and segmentations in society are still being formed, right? And if you look, for example, to the United States, where currently the culture wars are really reaching their peak, I don't know, but have produced quite a number of interesting things. You notice those forms of segmentation, right, and how they operate maybe differently. So even if things are maybe less kind of neatly arranged and more dynamic, there are also new ways of describing and conceptualizing society. So one can, for example, look at direct interactions as social network analysis has done since the work by Jacob Moreno in the 1930s, right? Which is indeed kind of another way of describing groups, right? The classic term in social network analysis is the term clique, and in many ways it's already a move away from those kind of socioeconomic groupings. It already says, no, a group is not people who have the same properties. No, a group is the people that interact with each other, right? And that, of course, allows them to think quite differently about segmentations, in terms of clusters maybe, in terms of cliques, in terms of, so there's a whole set of approaches that one can use to describe, indeed, these new or these kind of social dynamics. Cultural taste data, for example, is kind of very interesting, right? We know, of course, through Bourdieu's work, right, that cultural tastes are not something that, is independent from other forms of capital distribution in society, and of course that whole craze around machine learning is fueled by that, right? It's fueled. You can, of course, think about this as a phantasma of correlation, right? But that, I think, is a real problem, because these techniques, they really show their capacity to operate in those kind of strange social segmentations. And this is, I think, still the most emblematic study in that context. Well, there would be a lot to say about also the authors and Cambridge Analytics. I think you maybe know that story, but for those who don't know that study, this is an attempt to. It's a great way to understand how machine learning works, right? Because it always works like this. So what did they do? They asked one group of students, of course, right? Students, to give them access to their Facebook likes. Nothing else, just the likes, right? And then they asked them to position themselves or to give information in a questionnaire about the number of variables, these variables here, right? So here you have single versus in relationship, parents together at 21, so divorce, smoking cigarettes, drinks alcohol. Then you have Caucasian versus African American, Christianity versus Islam, gay, lesbian, and so forth, right? So what a machine learning algorithm does, it's able, from the relationship between the target variable, this, and all of those signals, the likes, well, to develop a model, right? And that model can then be applied to another group. So they took a second group, took in all the likes, right? And then used the trained model to classify each one of those people automatically on those target variables. And afterwards, they went to them and they asked, oh, did we get it right or not? And this is the level of success they had, right? So the highest one here is Caucasian versus African American with a 95% accuracy, right? So, I mean, there are many things to say about this, right? But what I want to suggest here is that the combination between these unusual data and a whole series of what you could call algorithmic techniques or research techniques present a way to operate inside of societies that maybe are no longer this kind of class thing, but that still have structure in many ways. And we can think about this as a research opportunity. We can of course think about this much more critically in political terms. I mean, this one, I think I really like to show that it's really something that is no longer possible, but it's really interesting because this is the network of likes that my Facebook friends, so not me, my Facebook friends made, right? Well, you don't know me that well, but I know myself sufficiently well to be really struck by, well, this really represents what I'm into, right? So what's interesting about it, it's not just that you are creating data. You don't have to, I really don't use Facebook all that much, but just what my friends shared is a really great way to position me in this kind of cultural sphere, if you will, right? So it's not just about like personal data, my data. This is a much more complicated thing, right? Data that connect in different way. So okay, to summarize this first part. Wow, I am only at slide 16 out of 100. So no, but I have a lot of stuff to jump over, so it's fine. So just to summarize, right? So there is a complex technological and social situation, and I think that really is something we have to keep in the back of the mind, because it also, what I want to suggest, particularly with this element, my emphasis on maybe the social dimension is we continuously need social theory, right? We need ways of conceptualize those things. It's not just about methodology and data, and there has to be much more than this. So this challenges traditional methods, but there are also new opportunities. But now if we go to what I've said I want to talk about today, where technology is involved, I think one can distinguish like four layers, right? And this connects to what I've already said. So one could say that technology is involved in actually mediating social relationships and practices and all of that stuff. Then it's involved in the construction of data pools that kind of relate to the way practices are mediating. Then it relates, for us in particular, to the extraction of data. Very important, that API stuff that Jean has already talked about. And then, more and more often, we use, well, you know, stuff like this. So we use computational techniques, if you will, to analyze these data. So those are at least 4 instances of technology that we want to maybe connect with, and I want to go through all of those 4. And each one of them, I think, points towards obscurity, zones of obscurity, and ways of dealing with them. So, second part. So I think since, you know, technology is really important to the social phenomena themselves, and to our methodology, I do think that when we want to do digital methods, we have to be prepared to engage with technology, right? This is really, I think, something that is really necessary. This doesn't necessarily mean that there's, you know, like an easy skill set. So what I want to think about through all of this a little bit is like more concretely, like how do we do that? How do we do that? But that also means that you have to make decisions for yourself, of course, right? Like how far you want to go and where to, you know, draw the line and so forth. So it's not like a kind of a general you know, checklist for things to know, rather maybe a way for how to think about all of this. I just want to give you a quote from that's a book that I read when I wrote my first master thesis. It's by Umberto Eco, right? It has recently been translated to English. How to write a thesis. In Italian, it's much better. It's come si fa una tesi di laurea. How do you make how do you make a thesis? Not write, make. I like that. And I was really impressed when I read that. Because he's like writing, So for writing your thesis, should you learn a new language? I thought, wow, that's a tall order, right? And he says, you know, the main tenet is this: we should not choose a topic. So here he's still, you know, around discussing which topics should I choose, and he says we should not choose a topic that involves foreign language skills that we do not currently possess or that we're not willing to acquire. And I thought that was a pretty strong statement. Afterwards, I learned French for that because I was really into French philosophy, and that made me learn French. So that's maybe, I think, at the top of what one should be expected to do. But I think this points towards us as actors in this technological configuration, right? We cannot delegate everything to other people, right? To say, oh yeah, you know, I'm going to hire that person. Some of it we can, right? But it's a complex question, and it's really a balance to be found. So Jana has already showed this slide, which I just want to quickly put up here again, because it's in many ways exactly those 4 things that I just talked about, right? The technicity, or if you will, the technology of the platform itself, of the APIs, of the extraction software, and then of the analysis software. And I want to walk through all of those elements step by step, and think about them a bit in terms of like how to deal with the obscurity that each one of those kind of highlights or opens up to. So this is already also something that Jana said, you know, so we have those platforms and they grammatize behavior in particular ways, and that includes, you know, particular forms and functions, ways of connecting. A really important element is what actions can users perform, right? This is something that, you know, we can look at from a very naive way, and for example, take Antonio Costa's tweet, and then, you know, analyze that tweet, and maybe analyze his account, and then we already see, you know, okay, so this first element, the platform, you know, works in specific ways, and you know, frames expression and interaction in particular ways. I think a very important element in there is that I think is especially in the context of social media, is very present, is scale, right? That's a really important element, and how the platform uses scale to modulate visibility. So here we have 3 three Twitter accounts, right? One has 108 million followers, Katy Perry. And this is, I find really fascinating, Paul Krugman, right? Nobel Prize winning economist and opinion writer for the New York Times. He has 4 million followers. That's pretty good, right? That's a lot of followers. So he, in my view, is a mass medium, right? For me, that's a mass media account, Paul Krugman, right? And then even, you know, I think Evgeny Morozov, right, everybody's favorite internet critic, you know, it's doing really well. And then from there, of course, you go down the power law. And somewhere at the bottom, there's my account. And yeah, so scale very important, but also the difference of practices. And that's, you know, here you have 3 Facebook pages, which in terms of scale aren't all that different. So they all have, for example, a similar, well, vaguely similar number of likes. I love cats. Kaluna Khaled Said, a Facebook page that it's a big research project that I participated in. A page that played a very important role in the Egyptian revolution of 2012, 2013. And then Coca-Cola, right? So we have the same technological forms, but here the difference is really scale, and not just scale, but here it's also, of course, content and practice, right? So we have those elements of variation. Then another element that I think is very interesting, and I'm going to talk about that one quite a bit in a moment, is pathways for content discovery. It's maybe a bit of an awkward way of describing this, but one way that I think a lot of debates around social media focus on that. How are people confronted with content, right? So when Angela Merkel says that Facebook has to make their algorithm transparent, what she means is that is the filtering algorithm for the news feed, right? That basically takes the unfiltered timeline and selects what to actually show you when you go there, right? But for example, on YouTube, there's really a very complex combination of different pathways that are really important. So people, of course, you know, search in the search field. People receive personalized recommendations. There's also a network of similarity between videos that inform that bar. So not all of this is personal recommendation. That is, that isn't, right? Then subscriptions play a very important role there, right? So whenever you, for example, you take a metric, if I say, oh, that video has so many views, I can think about it in terms of okay, what does this, can I use this as an indicator for something? But I can also think about it, but how were those views constructed? Where do those views come from? With YouTube in particular, you can embed a video in another web page, right? And that means that maybe the watching has happened, you know, at a very different place. So those are some of the elements of grammatization that are not so easy to account for, but it really do have a kind of an important dimension, right? I mean, money flows and commercial aspects, I think, are really crucial to understanding how platforms function. Yeah, the sorting algorithms. There has been a huge outcry when Twitter changed its what's the timeline, which used to be a reverse chronological timeline, and now it's algorithmically filtered. I don't know if you like that. I find it hugely annoying. But interestingly, and to add in another layer of complexity, if you do not consume Twitter through the web page, but you use, like I do, TweetDeck, you can actually still get the reverse chronological timeline. So when an algorithm changes for Twitter, well, what does that actually mean? Twitter isn't just, you know, twitter.com. It's a series of applications that people use, and actually each one of those applications allows for, and Caroline Gerlitz and I, we have a paper out today in the International Journal of Communication, where we say that those Twitter clients afford different ways of being on Twitter. You can automate stuff, right? You can, for example, every time a tweet appears that contains a certain hashtag, you can do something through a platform as primitive as if this then that, right? So when we talk about the grammars, it's not only the platform as if that were a thing, but can be a much larger ecosystem of things that well, are very important when it comes to understanding, for example, automated activity, a term that I prefer to the term bot. The term bot kind of suggests that there's humans here and there's like fully automated things there, but there's a lot of stuff happening in between. So if I write an if this then that script that does something every time your account does something, is that a bot? Yeah. But if I start using something like indeed TweetDeck to maybe schedule tweets and so forth, Hootsuite, use something like this. Am I being a bot? Am I being a computer-supported human? Right. So I like to think about this like a gradient of automation. Yeah. So the platform, grammars of action, important margins for users. Right. It's not like that we're being herded. Well, or at least the jury is out on to what degrees we're being herded by the grammars. Those platforms change, right, over time. It's a very complex thing. And I think understanding the platform, at least on a first level, is indeed important for understanding the constitution of data. So how has a particular signal been produced that I then want to maybe use as an indicator, right? And it also helps us to connect the signal back to that mediated social and cultural practice. And I'm going to, show you or talk much more about how to actually now do that. But just to give you a first glimpse of where do I want to go from there. So when I say, we have those platforms, and then, well, there are indeed methodologies to not just, have some kind of description, but to maybe begin structuring that aspect a bit more. And I want to highlight at this point something that Lightberg, Jess, and Duguay have recently proposed for app studies. They call it the walkthrough method. And it's something that's a bit, for those with maybe some computer science background, it's a bit similar to UML use case analysis. But it's a structured way of describing interface states, and what do you see on each one of the screens? How do you get from one interface state? So interaction designers are quite familiar with that kind of stuff. When I click here, what comes up, and so forth, right? To say, okay, so let's try and be a bit more structured when it comes to describing those interfaces, those forms and functions. So that's just one way, and I'm going to talk about others in a moment, but I want to do that together with this second element, the APIs that we use to collect data from social media services. And here, Jana has already said a lot or highlighted a lot of the elements that come into play here. So, for example, what can be retrieved, certain fields are accessible or not accessible, how much data can be retrieved. That's, for example, something, so I develop tools that do this kind of extraction, and dealing with that question, how much can be retrieved, is often an important subject, because there's rate limiting, and then, the API maybe blocks you, or it tells you the Twitter API, I think it was the Twitter API. Was it the Twitter API? I think it was the Twitter API that gave you at one point in the response the message, increase the calm, right? So if you hit it too hard, that's the message you got to be a nicer, to hit it a little bit less hard. Span of coverage, like the temporal span, that's a huge issue, Can I go back in time or not? And if I can, how, and so forth. And a lot of people who want to do Twitter research, and they would say, oh, yeah, I have this really interesting case, happened 2 years ago, and yeah, you gotta maybe buy the data, maybe find somebody and so forth. One aspect that I think is maybe a bit underestimated or is maybe not so well known is what I've called, oh no, actually I misspelled. It's not perceptivity, it's perspectivity. It should be perspectivity. So for example, privacy elements. So if you grab data from Facebook, you connect with your account to the extractor software. And that account will have consequences for what you can see. So it may be that two people looking at the same thing, let's say the same Facebook page, actually did not get the exact same data because both of their accounts have different, network connections and therefore are subject to different, privacy restrictions and so forth, right? That's what I call perspectivity. Personalization can be, another element in there. That's an example I really like to use because it shows particularly this, what data can be retrieved is not just, binary, but those are actually the markers you can currently get for a Facebook post from a Facebook page. So let's say you go to a Facebook page, you say, oh, I want to analyze the Facebook page of Antonio Costa, right? I want to download all the posts, and then you get the comment count for each post, you get the like count, and you get the share count. Nice. You get the individual user list for comments and likes, but not for shares, right? Well, you don't get that. The timestamp you get for the comments, but not for the likes. That means if you want to do, for example, something that we did in our Egyptian project where we looked at comment speed, how fast were comments made, you can do that with comments, but you cannot do it with likes. I do think that's going to disappear as well in version 2.11 of the Facebook API. Possibly, right? Yeah, so there are kind of many elements that many examples that one can go through. I think what's crucial is that there are indeed data pools out there, right? They are very much connected to those grammatical forms, and in order to understand this, understanding the platform is very helpful because the data are of course very close to those forms and functions on the surface. So I just said, in order to go a bit further towards understanding the platform, one could use something like the walkthrough method. On the level of the API, I also want to give you a quick example. Like, so what can we do about all of that API stuff, right? And one strategy could be API verification. So how am I able to, to get answers to those questions when I want to retrieve data? One thing is, for example, self-experimentation. Nearly all online services have APIs, but they also have tools to play around with the API in the web browser. So Facebook has what they call an API Explorer, and there you can, see, okay, if I make that query, I get that data, right? And it's also a way to actually confirm whether maybe the extraction software that you're using is producing the same data as the API Explorer, right? So that's a way to play around a bit with that stuff. Computer science and information science researchers are particularly interested in developing computational methods for verifying API output, and particularly around the Twitter API. There have been, like, I don't know, I want to say maybe 20, 30 papers looking, for example, into the question whether that 1% endpoint, which Twitter gives you, which is really interesting. So Twitter gives you basically, 1% randomly selected of all tweets going to the service at any time, right? So you can just say, give me 1% of all tweets. Super interesting, right? If you have this kind of macro analysis, or if you're into researching Trump, by my estimates, there have been points in time where I think more than half of all tweets have the word Trump in it. But that's a story for another day. But so is that 1% sample really a random sample, right? And so people study that, right? And this is stuff that if we want to use that endpoint, we can look into. With Twitter also there's a difference between the streaming API, which is basically this kind of, pipe that you open and then you just get tweets, and the search API where you say, I want to have tweets for that hashtag back to a week. And there are papers that compare the coverage of those two API, and the search API actually gives you a much less, representative coverage than the streaming API does, right? So there are people who do that, not for a living, but as part of what they do for a living. In all of this, there is no perfect transparency or accountability, right? So at one point, there's always a moment of trust, right? There's always a moment of, so even if you have access to like all the data, you can always, wonder what gets blocked maybe at different stages already. So at one point, there's always a leap of confidence. But what I want to suggest for the two A and B now, the platform and the API, is to think about a practice that the colleagues and I have called technical fieldwork. So something like the walkthrough method or API verification is part of what we call technical fieldwork. So technical fieldwork is a series of strategies to investigate instances of technological mediation and to really say, so now what is all of this? The reason why we like the term field is because the field in ethnography is also not like this kind of fully transparent thing, right? It's not like I go into the field and then through my method everything will become clear. No, there will always remain, zones of obscurity, but we're starting to make sense, right? And we're looking at, for example, technical norms, taboos, and idiosyncrasies, right? So APIs have taboos, in a certain sense. So there are quite some inspirations for this technical fieldwork, right? They have, I don't want to go too much into that, but there are people interested in doing platform studies and algorithm studies and app studies is a new field, and it's all around this kind of media studies, a broader field of media studies. Recently there have been a lot of efforts to create like algorithmic accountability. Diakopoulos talks about reverse engineering. So all of that is like an inspiration for technical fieldwork. And if you come from the space of the data, what we call data critique. So if historians use the term source critique to look at a document, I look at like how has it been constituted, right? So we see technical fieldwork as a day to do data critique. I have some data. How have these data been constituted? And there are endless examples of how those things come together. I mean, this is one of the things I really like. When again, this is our Egyptian Facebook project, and what we found, for example, was that there was a huge difference between the number of comments we were able to retrieve and the number of comments that the page said it had for different posts. So we try to account for that. We try to find ways of explaining that, right? Interestingly, the difference between retrieved likes and the like counter was smaller, right? So we also try to account for that. Maybe then adding caveats to our findings. Maybe saying, well, this is what we think, but we are not 100% sure, right? And then we found stuff like this, so this is just a list of posts, with some metadata, and they were then posts that had nothing. They were suddenly posts like no comments, no likes. What happened there? What happened there? And what we found out was kind of interesting was that if a Facebook administrator makes a post about an event, so they create an event, a post is created, but all the likes and comments, they go on that event object, which is actually not part of the post list. So I mean, this seems to be like a bit of a sophism here, right? But there's a real question. So now what do you do? Do you try to get the data from the event itself, but then you probably have to rewrite the whole tool chain? Do you simply exclude all of the? I mean, if you say, okay, so here's the average number of comments on that day, do you then count the event or not, right? And I'm not saying that there's an easy answer for that, but you have to account for it. And another example, which I think was really important to us, because this was really connected to our research question. We wanted to know, in this kind of framework of Lance Bennett's notion of a connective action, right? What is the relationship between the administrator on that page and the users, right? And one of the things that was very important on that page was what Rash Abdullah has called a proto-democratic mechanism that was put into place, like proto-polling. So the administrator of that page, Wael Ghonim, he would, he would always ask questions to the users, right? And actually, he configured the page in a way, and it's kind of interesting, that only he could make posts, right? It's also a grammar. Page administrators can decide whether, whether people can put posts on a page or not. And a post is not a comment, right? So people can always comment, but can they post? So in this case, no. So he was very much the organizer of that debate, and he was asking, what should we do? What should we do? What's our next thing? What's our next, should we make should we write stuff on the money as a means of protest? Should we create a human chain on the coast of Alexandria, And then he was going through the responses, and here, for example, this question here has 50,000 comments attached to it, 50,000, right? I don't know if he read all of them, right? But he basically read through them and then tried to decide, okay. But then, of course, Facebook introduced the polling feature. So that didn't exist at that point in time, but then it existed. And then, of course, he made these kind of polls. That feature is also gone again, right? So it's gone again. But now, if you think, okay, so there are now, of course, much fewer comments. So what does this mean? Has the activity on the page declined or what? Right? So those are really some of the ways where technical fieldwork is not just some kind of, geeks looking at technology, but it really means that, well, first of all, the practice itself changes, right? Because it's much easier to click out of 3 options than to write your opinion and so forth. But the data also, is no longer a signal or an indicator for exactly the same practice. A good way to account for all of those things is plotting, right? And Jana already said that, kind of plot stuff. This is simply over time, our 14,000 posts, and you could already see, something's happening here. It's the Egyptian revolution, right? It gives you a first idea about what's in the data, but then changing elements of the plotting a little bit. So here we moved from a linear scale to a logarithmic scale, which, if you're not familiar with that, what a logarithmic scale does, it basically compresses the top and zooms in on the bottom. So that's where we found all of those strange posts, right? And then you can go look, plotting really helps you maybe to say, hey, where do I have to go look to kind of, not just for the case, but also maybe to find some of those problems, right? Enscombe has made a classic argument for the utility of plotting in all kinds of data analysis. So those 4 data series here, they have exactly the same statistical properties, but they of course look very different, right? So plotting is a really good good strategy. Looking at the comparison between variables is also a very good thing. So even if you may be thinking like, the comments are there seem to be a lot of missing comments. What to do with that? But in our case, we looked at a number of variables: comments, likes, user numbers active on each one of those moments, right? And there was a coherence between them. So maybe our exact numbers were problematic, but the general thrust is much more robust, right? And also these comparisons led us to some very, very interesting findings. So what I highlighted here, so this line here, is on this Facebook page is the number of posts. Posts were made by only the administrator, right? And what you can see is up till here, whenever Wael Ghonim posted a lot of stuff,
all the other metrics also shot up, right? Whenever he like put stuff, you know, online, all people were commenting, liking, right? And there's almost perfect correlation between those variables. Up to this point. This point, well, first of all, he goes to prison, so posting goes down. But what you can see is at this point, that line goes down, and all the others continue going up, right? And that was really for us, for me, it's one of the most revealing moments in all of data analysis I've ever done. This breaking of a revolutionary moment, right? Revolutions have this problem, like you may get shot, right? So the first one to step forward is pretty high, you know, probability they will get shot, right? So nobody wants to be the first one that makes that step, right? So there's a lot of waiting, right? It's a first mover problem, a lot of waiting happening, and this is really the moment where that changes, and one of the functions of the Facebook page was that. One of the functions of the page wasn't, I mean, there was coordination of activity, but one of the functions was solving that first mover problem. If you go then and look into the text of the posts and the comments here, what you see is that the tone changes. So from this kind of debating strategy saying, I don't care, I'm going, I don't care if I get shot, I'm going, right? And because enough people said, you know, I'm going, and I may get shot, but I don't care, a lot of people were going, right? And that kind of solves that kind of a problem, right? So kind of plotting and combining of variables can be a very interesting way of doing at the same time technical fieldwork and creating and you know, starting to create findings or think about, you know, analytical possibilities. For me, very often thinking about the platform is a good way to actually start thinking about methods. Of course, you could do the same for you know, web data and so forth. How much time do I still have? 20, 25? Okay. Yes. Is you know, talking a lot of stuff? Yeah. Well, there's a video apparently. But okay. So what technical fieldwork does is trying to make some of those idiosyncrasies visible, right? And then actually to draw on it also as a source of inspiration, as a way of maybe, you know, kind of coming up with good ideas. So making the platform the object of research can be part of a study of a particular case, but it can also be a project in its own right. And I want to quickly show you another project that we did, which the paper just came out in Convergence, and this is something where we didn't necessarily try out to do technical fieldwork for social research, but rather use digital methods for platform research. But I do think that it's really something that can be very interesting for people then who want to, you know, look at specific cases on YouTube. So this project, which I do think is an example for what you could call technical fieldwork, there we tried to come up with Ariana Matamoros Fernandez and Oscar Coromina with a method for studying ranking on YouTube, right? YouTube is the second most used search engine on the web, so we were interested in what can we say about ranking? How does ranking work? We wanted to move a bit away from this idea that it's an algorithm that does the ranking. So the paper is actually called From Ranking Algorithms to Ranking Cultures, right? So we wanted to build this kind of integrated view on ranking. And we were combining computational analysis with like various forms of qualitative investigation. We were very much inspired by Mike Savage's notion of descriptive assemblage, which is a little bit like thick description, you know, Clifford Geertz's term, but is also kind of based on this idea of like combining different methodological techniques and kind of, you know, iterating around, you know, kind of always more description, and particularly description rather than hard causality. So we moved to this term of ranking cultures, and one of the tools, I think, the core empirical tools or let's say empirical concepts was this notion of rank morphologies. So this is something that we want to operationalize. So what does that mean? So what we did was, our starting point is this. You have YouTube, right? And YouTube, you can put a term in the search field, right? And then you get a ranking. This is what we wanted to understand. Like how is this ranking kind of built, if you will? So we had a number of queries. In this case, it's queries Syria. And we queried YouTube every day with those queries through the API for our 7, actually we had more, but in the end we only used 7, our 7 queries. And that created a bunch of data, right? We also did a lot of...
Quick question on that. When you queried them, were you using any IP blocking or deletion of cookies or anything?
No, so I went through the API.
Oh, through the API.
Through the API, yeah.
But from which API? I mean, from which IP? From your university IP?
Yeah, from the university IP. The thing is, we didn't really systematize that, but we did quite a number of kind of tests. So we tried to connect from different IPs. The thing is, the API itself has a locale parameter and a language parameter. So you can select US-N, US-ES. So you can set those. And we've tried to see whether the results are affected by from where we query, and that wasn't the case. But that, of course, doesn't mean that we can really simulate the exact experience that a user may have on the level of the smartphone app, right? So in a sense, we get maybe this ground level access through the API. But actually, nobody has that exact ground level access because they are all being personalized, right? So that's, yeah.
You said a mixture between your own history as well.
Exactly. And there's a real question how strong that happens in ranking. But our impression is actually that personalization in the level of search ranking isn't that strong. But we tried it out more than really systematized it. Yeah. So indeed, that's also technical fieldwork, right? Kind of trying to understand, okay, personalization, localization, and so forth. We looked in the Wayback Machine, and we found actually some explanations by YouTube on their ranking mechanism. That was really nice. Revealingly, that stuff has been taken away. And then we relied on 2 tools, the YouTube data tools, which allowed us to make those queries, and the rank flow visualization tool that basically allowed us to, so each one of those columns is a day, right? And those are individual videos, the blocks, right? And here you can already see, for example, the top video on the first day is also the top video on the second day, but then it's only the second video on the third day, so that's rank, On top is the top video, and that we used to make sense. We used some computational methods, rank bias distance, which is a way to quantify, and this is really another kind of obscurity that appears here, right? So if I say, okay, so we try to quantify change. Right, so we wanted to give a number on the changiness of a query over time. So that, I think, it's fine for everyone. Then what we wanted to have is a metric that can express a change in rank, right? Not just change in out, right? Videos. Deal with non-conjointness. So many metrics can't do that, meaning that it's not like every day has exactly the same videos, right? And also what we wanted to have is a bit like this. And now, obscurity starts maybe already in your mind, like, oh, what's this, right? So we wanted that our metric expresses change at the top more strongly than change lower down in the ranks. Meaning if something changes in the top ranking, that's going to have a bigger effect on the metric. And that's probably also still fine. But this is the metric, right? And yeah, maybe that's a point where the black box becomes too dark, or not, right? This is then a question. Those are some of our morphologies. We distinguish three: stable with what we call newsy interruptions, and then like fully newsy. That's Trump. Huh? So Trump in summer 16. Yeah. Yeah, you can see there was actually no video that was in the ranking for longer than 4 days over the 6 weeks that we took up. Right? This is like you know, whereas this one on the top is of course. What we then try to do is for each one of those cases, queries, so this is, for example, Gamergate, so all just cases that we'd already done research before, was to really, you know, describe more and more, and not just say, the algorithm, but really try to see what is the content being put forward, which kind of actors are being brought to the foreground, right? So one of the interesting findings I think that we made was there's a lot of YouTube native content that sometimes kicks in very hard. It's very interesting. This is the query for Syria. So what you can see is you have those big red bands. Those are, that's actually by explainer videos by Vox and Vice. The big red band and the big blue band, right? They have a lot of views. That's why they are so big. And they dominate, you know, they're always there. And then there are those periods where they're completely gone from the top 20 rankings. You know, here, completely gone. And what's there? Like strange videos that we call the war porn. It's videos, very often from Russian channels, like war leaks, and it's war porn. But it's not. The thing is, it's not like dead people. It's simply videos of war machinery in operation, like hour-long videos of. Not even the rockets going anywhere, but just the rocket launcher shooting. Right? So there's a whole community online that apparently is very densely connected that just apparently likes to watch. I mean, there's all kind of, maybe a question there if that's actually, there's really an element of military intelligence happening there, right? But, you know, that we couldn't verify. But those, in particular moments, they came in and dominated the rankings, right? So I want to just accelerate a little bit here. So we have those stable periods, right? We have those newsy periods, and then we have this stuff where everything changes. And I mean, one way of thinking about this is, of course, you know, in terms of the algorithm. But of course, from a research perspective, if you want to look at, you know, if you want to look at videos from YouTube and you rely on the ranking function, well, you know, your snapshots in a very newsy morphology may literally be that, a snapshot of that day, right? So here in the Trump context, right? So things are changing very, very quickly. So this affects us as researchers. On the other side, what I thought was very interesting in this project is that actually we had to move in our description. We weren't able to really find strong causality. We found stuff like this, which was kind of interesting. So we found, for example, that there is quite some correlation between search volume, which we got from Google Trends, video production volume for a certain query, which you can get for the past. So you can know, it's possible to know how many videos with the query Syria were published on a particular day 3 years ago, right? And average changiness. So there was a real correlation between that. So things changed at the same time when people were publishing a lot of videos about a certain query, and people were also searching a lot for that query, right? So there's some kind of algorithmic causality. But what we found is actually that, that we have this kind of completely integrated situation where, like, the particulars of a case, right, this kind of Syria war porn stuff, for example, that's not something that you can easily express as a, like, you know, a series of signals or something. There's ranking is the outcome not just of an algorithm, right? It's a distributed effort that produces all kinds of outcomes. So we then looked at all kinds of factors. Yeah, but this is a way where I think kind of technical field work can also be a way to actually do cultural research about YouTube. One could do similar things for recommendation, right? You can look at not recommendation, but video similarity. You can we haven't done that systematically. That's for a future project. But just saying, with YouTube you can do quite a bunch of stuff. So this is a bit just a couple of examples to kind of deal a bit with that obscurity and maybe on the one side make things maybe a bit clearer about what's happening there, but also saying, well, there's a level of causal explanation that we won't ever be able to access, right? There's no easy way of saying, well, this is how YouTube ranking works, right? It just doesn't exist, that kind of clarity. But what we want to do is kind of multiply description and explanation. So kind of instead of saying, those are the technical factors and there are the social factors, like look at how they aggregate and then maybe kind of think about, okay, how do they two come together? For example, our hypothesis was that YouTube kind of oscillates according to publication and search volume between what you could call maybe a Google.com mode, which is more authority-based, right? Like in line with the PageRank model, and between like a Google News moment. And it seems almost like the two switch, that YouTube switches between them. When it detects that, this is a news event, right? It will privilege new videos a lot. And when it says, news now, then you really have the same actors there, the big videos dominating and so forth, right? So the ranking definitely has a technical component, but that really interacts with other kinds of cycles. So I have like 10 minutes left, maybe, so about 5, 10, 5. Yeah. Maybe real quickly, just to give you a general idea how this would continue, because I have a bunch more slides. So now I've talked mostly about the platform and the API, but one could now really kind of continue this story towards the extraction software, right? So whenever you're using a piece of extraction software, well, you're adding a layer of kind of technological mediation, right? When you get outputs, some of those outputs are very closely related to the API. In other cases, they may not be. Some of the outputs may really be constructed from kind of different parts of the platform, right? So the programmer has maybe decided to do that. And I just want to give you an example. So that's NetVis here. That's a tool that I develop. And it creates 5 outputs for pages, right? Some of them are literally a CSV version of the API call. Well, some selection happening, right? But of course, the 5th one here, the bipartite graph, that's pretty much constructed. That's really kind of a quite constructed view, right? And there's a whole number of questions one could ask about construction software. And those, come with their own type of obscurity. For me, the cost is a type of obscurity. Because it can, for example, mean, well, because the data, for example, for Twitter costs that much, I can only, select this particular space and I cannot get the full overview, right? So what's the degree of processing view creation? Does the software give you more or less raw data, right, under quotes? Do the outputs and the parameters fit your research, right? What is the perspectivity of the output? Is there good documentation, right? That's really important. Are there research publications? How many users does a tool have? It's a good thing. Users make software better by breaking it in various ways, right? And by noticing all kinds of shenanigans. So the mass of email I get sometimes can be quite daunting. Is there support? Are there user groups? So if you use, for example, my software, there's no support. You want support, you write me an email, you won't get an answer. Now you can say, that Rieder guy, he's kind of a douche, not answering my emails. But you know, I already developed the software in my spare time. I maintain it. I don't do tech support. And if you want that, you have to use something where you pay money. And you know, that's a real issue. That's a real issue. So those are all kind of questions that you want to check, right? And I think the same questions one could ask then for the analysis software. What I do think is that things become more broadly. There's more choice involved. You can't change the API at all, right? At all. The platform you have no influence over. With extraction software, well, you can choose between different extractors, but you could also program something yourself, right? With the analysis software, the moment of you know, developing an analytical gesture becomes even more open, and your choices are even broader, and there are all kinds of you know, there's a wide variety of choice out there, you know, and there's all kinds of traditional paradigms that you can study, you know, statistics, graph theory. That's all stuff that you can learn to reduce the obscurity of the analysis software, right? I really like historical approaches to these questions. That's my way of you know, like where does the correlation coefficient come from? That's stuff I like to read into. Then you know, there's all kinds of elements like, okay, you know, do I use an arithmetic mean to describe the central tendency of this distribution? Well, the answer is no, you don't, right? This, yeah, yes, no, right? So those are things that one can learn by looking, not by learning tools, but by learning statistics, reading a book about statistics. Plotting again, right? There's great plotting tools, yeah. Well, if one wants to go there, there's a paper on that, for example. You know? So looking into the papers. Same thing could be done for graph theory. Like, you know, those are 3 layouts of the same network. Like, how does that, you know? There's really a tradition of that, and one can read into that, you know. If you're interested in those kind of more complex metrics, they have a history. But there's also like really great introductory reading. So this is probably the most well-known researcher in the social networking field, Linton Freeman. And he's written a whole bunch of books, right? It's like, that's a good starting point. Me personally, I think that's actually much better. Or not much better, but I think it's as good a starting point as the tool. It's like reading something like this. Yeah, and maybe to just finish with a couple of pointers, and this is something I want to do a bit in my tutorial, showing how to maybe work a little bit with text, but also with more generally with tabular data. But there are all kinds of levels of complexity of that. You know, when text is this free-form data that I've talked about in the beginning. It's hard to deal with. But there are things like this, you know, you can make a tag cloud, right? You can use simple metrics to get an idea what's happening. And then already the choices creep in, right? So this one, tag crowd, it's actually pretty good. It has a number of transformations, lowercase transformation, has some lemmatization, has some, you know, cutoff points and so forth. So, you know, trying that stuff out, and this is something you can really do during the data sprint, I think, allows you to kind of reduce obscurity. Qualitative analysis. I think one of the strongest things in the context of digital methods is random sampling in combination with qualitative classification. Like, you know, that's in vivo, right? It helps you a bit with the classification, but one can easily do that in a spreadsheet software, right? Very, very strong technique. The software I'm working on, I'm going to show that in a tutorial. And then maybe, you know, move from there to a bit more complex stuff. So that's a list from a word frequency list from a paper I wrote. I always like to use my papers it's a really good thing. So instead of instantly working with data that you're unfamiliar with, a good way of seeing what the method does is to work with stuff that you're very familiar with. And then you can see, oh yeah, that's my paper, I know that really well. Those frequencies are actually pretty okay. But bigram frequencies are much better. So you can use a tool like WordIJ to do a whole bunch of stuff with text. For example, extract bigram frequencies. Those are words that often appear together, right? So it's not like frequencies, pure counts, but there's some computation involved, but you still understand how that is being constructed, right? Even if you know nothing about data mining, you can still understand. I have to say, bigrams, excellent, excellent. Especially if you want to compare over time. You can use the same tool, you know, to make it's the same article, huh? To make a network of words. How do they connect, you know? Working with text doesn't have to be like sentiment analysis, right? Although you can use that too. Those are, if you, I'm gonna send around the PowerPoint. You can, those are Trump tweets. Sorry, it's like there's only one topic left. Classified by the NLTK Veda library, right? Sentiment analysis, fun, but here, you know, things are really starting to get much more complex. That's an example for latent Dirichlet allocation, the most commonly used topic modeling techniques. One of the most cited papers I've ever seen, 21,000 citations. You know, you can look into what people have been doing with that, even if the computational processes. That's for me when the box closes. That's for me I have to say LDA, I haven't been able to fully work through yet. Right, so I probably would need like one week where I work through the paper until I can understand. No, I think I can never understand why, but how the algorithm has been able to, you know, extract those topics from, well, in this case, it's Reddit stuff, right? Those advanced methods are interesting, and you could, you know, go through like working with images in similar ways, right? You could say, well, you could classify images like manually, you know? You can call them into your spreadsheet like this. I'm going to show you how that works. You can plot them, really fun. This is images plotted by the number of comments they got. There's a really interesting way of creating like a distance reading technique, with an image plot. Or you can start, I think this is what Andre are going to look at, you know, Google's Vision API, where quite frankly, you'll never, there's no level of sufficient, or well, sufficient maybe, but there's no level of complete understanding like how Google's Vision API works. I mean, you can say, okay, it uses probably based on TensorFlow and you know, but that's a different kind of obscurity. So, can I 2 minutes? No. Yeah. So I just want to reiterate just 2 or 3 points. So what I think is important is that this kind of obscurity, right, isn't starting with, you know, social obscurity, like you know, society getting more complex, but on those different layers of technological obscurity. I mean, I think sometimes we kind of require of things that have to do with technology to be exact. But when do we ever have transparency in any area of life? You know, when we study people through questionnaires, we can drill their brains open, right? And I think there's a lot to learn actually from how people and how methods have been trying to, you know, iterate and maybe bring together different methods, you know, combine them through descriptive assemblage, various forms of detective work, right? Critical technical practice, and come to descriptions that involve technology, but that aren't, you know, those kind of quantitative diamonds of exactness. So what I'm kind of trying to sell you is a little bit of kind of a qualitative sensitivity for the computational stuff, right? Because it has so many idiosyncrasies and there's so many decisions to be made, right? Yeah, that in my view, kind of some of those kind of qualitative elements are a really good thing. And those are just some recommendations for you maybe, you know, want to keep in mind during the data sprint. It's to investigate, you know, the platforms hosting your cases, you know, look through academic publications. Gray literature is awesome. Gray literature is stuff like reports, but also industry websites. You know, there are industry websites dedicated to helping you make your video rank really high on YouTube. So if you're interested in YouTube ranking, that's a good place to go, right? Because those people, they've done that for a long time. So there's a great information. You know, kind of investigate the data and the data extraction, maybe with different data sets, smaller stuff, larger stuff, right? Try out the possibilities and the limitations, get a sense of that. Well, learn analytical principles before learning tools is a bit difficult, but I think one can really learn them in conjunction, right? I think actually learning something like Gephi is a good starting point for saying, well, maybe I'm learning Gephi, and on the side, I'm reading Linton Freeman's book, right? You're going to see it's going to come together really, really well. Then test the methods on small data sets and different data sets. So my students, they love this idea of I have to get all the data. And then they spend so much time on data extraction. And they always ask me, but how much data do I have to extract? And I don't know, I don't care. Little. You're here to learn, not to, you know. Yeah. Different data sets, also quite important, because that, I think, really gives you the gist of the method, because you will see some methods, they react, you know, something like for example, topic modeling may work very well for some kind of textual data, but not so well for other stuff. So that's also really a good thing to take into account. Start with the simple methods, but several, you know, plot the data from different ways. Count, sample, and classify manually. I cannot exaggerate that or emphasize that enough. A good random selection out of a big data set plus some, you know, good old human brain is pretty can yield pretty great results. Combine methods and articulate results. You know, so especially if you use something more computational, is this coherent with maybe something, you know, something smaller, something? Yeah. Don't fear redundancy. You know, even if you think that different or you know, using 2 or 3 methods, you would get the same stuff. You think, yeah, they do the same thing. They can vary in important ways, and they allow you to make stronger findings because you can say, well, I did this, this, and this, and there was coherence between them, right? What's invariant between different methods? Yeah, iterate, critique, and adjust both your methods and your questions. Right? I think that it's good to have a research question, right? But don't get hung up on the research question. You may the methodological process itself is a process of learning. So you may actually learn that your initial research question wasn't what you really wanted to know or what was really important, right? So I think this is yes, and that's it. Thank you, and well, enjoy the sprint. And sorry for talking at least 10 minutes too long. Is that it?
That's okay. Thank you, Bernhard. We have time for 1 or 2 questions.
Okay. Could you repeat what you just said?
Can I just ask, you said learn Gephi and also read which book, sorry, I missed that. Could you just repeat which book it is that we should read while learning Gephi?
It depends a little bit. I would say there are in general kind of 2 types of books. One are more like the how-to books, right? And there you have a lot of stuff, right? I'm not sure if there's a Gephi book out there, but I think it probably is, right?
There is Gephi,
yeah. And that is one way of learning it. My preference goes a bit to that historical stuff, right? So Linton Freeman's development of social network analysis really tries, I mean, he calls it himself a sociology of science. So he basically goes back to, well, what's the earliest example, to Jacob Moreno, Who Shall Survive, right, 1936, and then shows how social network analysis develops. And for me, that historical stuff is more helpful than the how-to stuff. Because the historical stuff gives you also the reasons, like why were people interested in, you know, having something like betweenness centrality or you know. So all of those different algorithms you have, for example, to calculate authority, you know, what was the kind of the epistemological hunch there. So I really like that stuff, but I think there's also different sensitivities. Yeah.
I was thinking of something that you mentioned that was going to be part of the topic, then I decided not to. But I think it's interesting because in the context of what you presented, like the idea of machine learning, and I'm thinking like APIs, like Google Vision API and others that are emerging, which are basically AI models to analyze data. And then when we take APIs as part of the analytical tools, not just on the data extraction. And I'm just thinking how you think of that in relation to implications for methods.
I mean, in a sense, this isn't new, right? So there have been like many what you could call analytical APIs. So I mean, we've worked already like 10 years ago with stuff like OpenCalais, right? Which, for example, you would send a text to the API, and they would be. So OpenCalais was constructed by Thomson Reuters, right? Thomson Reuters, one of the biggest information companies in the world, and they have like really good, like they have really good ontologies, right? They have good like concept. Schemes, right? And they basically apply those on your text, and what you get as a return, they will extract like place names and like people's names and maybe subject stuff, right? And I've always thought that they're interesting, but also kind of really problematic. I think at this stage, it's about kind of trying that stuff out. I'd probably be at one point. So I'd be quite comfortable at this point writing a paper about my experiments with the Google Vision API. I would not be confident to write a paper on things I have learned about the world using Google's Vision API, just like this. But I think this can also give us, what I like about the APIs is they show you, these analytical APIs, they show you what's possible, and ultimately they then say, well, we could do that ourselves, download TensorFlow and stuff like this. What I think where social scientists and humanists are going to do really interesting work in the future is using different target variables than the companies. So a company, for example, Google's Vision API can do stuff like, what is in the picture, right? Yeah. It can do stuff like, is this a spoof, right? Stuff that, for example, people who are content moderators for a forum need, or it can tell you, is this porn or not, right? And those are, for example, analytical categories that personally I'm not interested in, right? But could we train something like TensorFlow to account for, is this an activating image? Is this, what kind of emphatic communication is this, right? To have a different set of variables, right? That I think would be, in the future, is going to be really interesting, and that the API is not going to do for us.